So busy Friday night for us this year. Real excited about the 4 guys that we added to the roster this evening. Maybe give you kind of a quick hitter on each player. So first with Carson, I think you guys know our history here is we haven't necessarily invested a ton of resources, in the off-the-ball linebacker room, with really Jeremiah being the notable exception in 2021. We felt like Carson was a pretty unique player at the position. Fast, athletic, really good in the passing game. He can blitz, and he's super smart and aggressive. We felt like he was really another modern-day archetype at the position. And we really felt like he could really elevate that position room, if we can get him to his potential at maturity. So we were really excited to add him to the team. With Q, rugged run style. I'm sure a lot of people in this room have seen him at Ohio State this year. Really a bell cow, versatile runner who can run through you, run by you, run around you. We're really excited to have him available to us at the 36th pick. With Harold, he's really kind of the queen on the chessboard. He's a really good ball and hand player, can separate as a pass catcher, despite being a little bit undersized. He's really a good movement style blocker, and he fits perfectly in terms of what Kevin and Tommy want to do philosophically on the offense. And then Dylan, we spent a lot of time with Dylan throughout this process. Brought him in right after the combine. Did obviously the private visit and workouts out in Eugene. Decorated college career, very accurate, very poised, throws with the anticipation, good mobility. We just thought he had a really well-rounded game. And the biggest negative that you can say about him is he doesn't have ideal height, but that's not something that we felt like showed up in his game or his film at UCF. Oklahoma, and certainly not at Oregon this year. So we're really excited to add these young guys to the room and, to the roster. With that, I'll open up for questions.
Andrew, throughout this entire draft process, you've talked about value, maximizing the value of these picks. You've talked about this entire process about maximizing value. At 94, with Shadur Sanders still on the board, a guy that you spent a lot of time with, why was the value not there to take him and at quarterback take Dylan?
Yeah, like I said, we really felt strongly about Dylan throughout this process. Think he's a really strong, really, really good prospect. That's not to say that we didn't meet with other quarterbacks that we thought were really talented players and good people, but we felt strongly about Dylan. We think he's an excellent player, and felt like he was the most appropriate player to pick.
But for both, looking at Dylan's numbers, more than 2,100 career passing attempts, but only 32 interceptions. Kind of going back, Kevin, to you talking about taking care of the football. How much of that, when you looked at his game and talked, how much of that, was part of the evaluation with him?
Yeah, I mean, like AB said, Chris, it's such a, when you're looking at any position, you're looking at so many things in total, but certainly when you bring up that amount of attempts versus those interceptions, speaks to the quarterback's decision making. So that's certainly one of the things that you're excited about with watching Dylan, with being around him, understanding how he thinks about the game and understands how to take care of the football.
Can maybe both of you address how much time you guys spent with him at the Senior Bowl, and having Jacques there, coaching the team that he was on, and also having Bubba there? How much did that give you a little head start on the eval?
Yeah, I'd say, for really all of our prospects, we try and get as many touch points as possible. I think I'd mentioned in my pre-draft presser just, why we think with the quarterback position, the additional time, the additional in-person visits are important. So with Dylan, obviously has a lot of college film in a number of different environments and different offensive systems. You see him for the full week at the Senior Bowl, where he's just kind of thrown into the mix, new offense, see that he really passes that test. You see him meet with them, at the combine. We bring him in the, 3 days after the combine ends for the top 30 visits. Go out and see him in Eugene and do the private workout and visit and everything. So we felt like we had a really strong feeling of what we believe to be his strengths and weaknesses throughout the process, and got to know him really well, like a lot of the other quarterbacks in this class.
And Kevin, you can answer this. When you talk to these guys in these interviews, what kind of read do you get on how receptive a player will be to learning? Like, he'll have to be learning under Joe and Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, I think every single one of our guys that we bring in, Jeff, understand that they're rookies and they have work to do, no different than any position. And I think, to AB's point, just about these 4 guys that we're bringing in tonight, and add Mason was that yesterday? These are good players. These are good people. These are people that we want in our building. We want them to. We want to embrace them into what we believe, but they are certainly made of the right stuff. And part of that, to your question, Jeff, being made of having that makeup where they're not finished products and they know they have a lot to learn, they'd be very, very smart, all these guys, to learn from these veterans in the building.
I got one for each of you guys. Hey, Andrew, when you're watching quarterbacks go off the board, was Dylan a guy that you kind of targeted at this spot the whole time, or how did that kind of play out as you're watching the other guys go?
Yeah, no, he was. Really, he was among the short list of players that we were considering, well before the draft at this spot. Scott, yeah.
And Kevin, how do you evaluate what Andrew called the lack of ideal height for a quarterback in this league?
No, it's a good question. Obviously, there's guys that have come before Dylan. There are guys that come after him that don't have the quote-unquote ideal height, but hasn't held him back in his career. He's been that height for a long time. He finds a way to get it done, and that's so important. There's quarterbacks, different shapes and sizes. You have to be able to move in the pocket. You have to feel the pocket. You have to find throwing lanes. You have to change arm angles. All that comes innately, I think, to players based on how they've kind of played the game their whole life.
We'll go Tony, then Cam, then Daryl.
Andrew, just 2 things about Gabriel. First, just comment on it. He seems an older player, 6 years experience, 24 years old. Comment on that. But also, just before him, Milroe went to Seattle. Totally different styles, obviously. Was Milroe among the considerations at that pick?
So for your first question, it probably goes back to when you asked about the age thing before the draft. That can be a factor in a prospect's profile, but there's no single eliminator. Every prospect's going to have strengths and weaknesses in their profile. Probably age with quarterback, there's a little bit more fluidity with that, honestly, Tony. And I think also the difference is you think of age in the context of their college career. So with Dylan, the guy's played football, been a starting quarterback since he's been 18 years old, in college football. This is not a player who, it took several years for him to become the starter and, didn't become the starter till he was an older college senior. So we didn't feel like that was a major a detriment in terms of his profile. And in terms of Jalen, we spent a lot of time with him. Obviously know him really well from Tommy's experience in Alabama. You're right, very different styles. But we've always said with the quarterback position, our view is we want to make sure that we build around that player according to their strengths. So Jalen's strengths are very different than other prospects in the class strengths. If we had selected him, we would have built an offense that we thought was appropriate for his strengths. And, we would do the same for any quarterback in the room.
Speaking of building around him, this was a skill players kind of day for you guys. You said day 2 is a sweet spot for the draft. So for you, what did you maybe like about what this draft offered, and how do you envision these additions coming into what you hope is another revamped offense this year?
Yeah, so I guess I'll go with the last part of your question, Kim. With Q, we feel like he's just a very well-rounded back, and we've obviously been spoiled over the past couple of years, particularly with Nick and Kareem, and we feel like he is very much in that mold in terms of skill set. Not necessarily saying that he's going to with certainty develop into one of those players. We certainly hope that's the case, but we think that he can be a bell cow runner that can really carry the load for us. And then Harold, he's a mismatch piece for us in terms of how defenses are going to have to account for him and David on the field when we're in 12 personnel, and whether he's split out, whether he's in a traditional alignment, whether he's in the backfield. He gives us that flexibility for Kevin and Tommy to be really creative in terms of how they design personnel packages, formations, and ultimately scheme up the run and pass game. And in terms of Dylan, I kind of touched on him already, but that's how we would view it.
Question for both.
first for you, Andrew, and then I have one for you too, Kevin. With Carson, Andrew, did Jim give you a bear hug when you drafted him? And you mentioned you're open, like you guys haven't spent a lot of draft capital on that particular position. What was it about him that, had you using that 33rd pick on him?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us is guys at the off the ball linebacker position for us to maybe go outside of the norm. We have to project them to be able to do something special or well above average in the passing game. And for Jeremiah, that was really his ability as a blitzer. Like he was a great run defender because he can make plays behind the line of scrimmage and everything. But he was really special, or is really special, I should say, as a blitzer. With Carson, his profile is maybe a little bit different in the fact that he's shown himself to be a really strong coverage player. Whether man or zone. He, very much like Jeremiah, he's very good in the run game, very instinctive, surefire tackler. But when we look at that position, and if we're going to invest, significant resources, it's, hey, can this player contribute above and beyond on third down?
And for Kevin, with adding Harold to your tight end room, we know how much you love tight ends. He really seemed to stand out in the big games against the bigger opponents. Right. How much did that catch your eye? And when you're watching those highlights, did that get you doing a little lobbying for him with Andrew?
No lobbying. Yeah, I think with Harold, the tape kind of speaks for itself. An extremely productive player. We did a lot of work on Harold. Can I tell him we went to Bowling Green?
Mm-hmm, you can tell him. You can tell him where we had the.
We had lunch at Frickers. Yep, which was lovely. No, but so did a ton of work on Harold. The tape jumps out, like you said. You watch Penn State, watch Texas A&M. He's a very productive player. Coach Loeffler did an awesome job with him at Bowling Green, moving him around the board, like AB said, like a queen in chess. And he's very versatile. He's a young man. I think he's just 20 years old. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of development there, but excited about the versatility that he brings, and it's on tape. He really lines up all over. He's a wildcat quarterback. He does a lot for the football team, and it's a young player that we feel like can ascend.
Have you guys talked to Harold yet? Oh, okay. Well, when he comes here next time you talk to him, ask him how he picked Frickers as the restaurant. Just ask him. Okay.
Andrew, I had another Harold question actually along those lines of what Kevin was talking about with him being only 20 and that young. Like, was it similar to David when you guys were evaluating him back then to think, hey, this kid's not even going to be 21 until a few months from now?
No, it's a good observation actually. Like I think so this maybe even kind of blends into your questions about age, Tony. I think if you think oftentimes about the top of the draft, it's like age combined with some form of early production and the physical characteristics for that player to be able to get on the field early enough to develop. And I think for Harold, the way we looked at it is like, okay, here is a 20-year-old pass catcher who's playing at a mid-major, and he's the guy that everybody knows knows that they have to stop. And whether he goes to College Station or at Penn State, and he's the best player on the field. Like nobody at 20 years old, and he's the one person going in that two of the top defenses in college football have to stop. So that weighs heavily. There are very few skill players that can do that at later in their college career, and for him to be able to do that with maybe not a dynamic supporting cast, at 20 years old, it's incredibly at a young 20-year-old at that. It's very impressive. Again, it's not the end all be all, in terms of youth, but I guess think about it this way: like for him to do that at 20, at Bowling Green, whereas if you think about an individual athlete who did that would have done that at 23 at LSU, like there is some important context there in terms of the quality of the performance. So we do weigh that. It's not like it's a tectonic shift in terms of how we would view the valuation, but it does mean something.
This one's for you, Kevin. In talking to Dylan at the Senior Bowl, he's obviously very, very confident. He's played a ton of football. Will he have a chance to come in here and compete for the starting job just as much as Kenny will and just as much as Joe will?
I think all of our players are competing for starting jobs. I think, but the most important part for any player walking into our building is really focusing on the work it's going to entail, Mary Kay, because as you know, it's a lot coming at these guys early. So we'll get our hands on them in a couple of weekends at the rookie mini camp, but we anticipate all of our players to carve out a role, whether that's as a starter, as a backup, and it's really no different here.
And how will it present some challenges for you to divide up the quarterback reps? You've never really had to do that before quite like this.
Sure. I think it's over the course of time been around, and Tommy and Bill have been around examples where you have sometimes 4 guys. So there's ways to maximize reps, would be the best way to put it.
Let's go Nate, then Tony, then Spencer, then Kelsey, and then Scott, and then we're going to call it a night.
See if we can remember that.
Yes.
Hey, Andrew, I know that, needs or perceived needs don't necessarily drive, your thinking in a draft, but, JOK has an uncertain situation. Nick Chubb's not under contract, and David Njoku has 1 year left on his deal. So to pick players on day 2 in those positions, does that set you up for, however those situations may play out? Is that, when you think of one foot in the present, one in the future, is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, look, Nate, I think that's a fair observation. Not to say that that's what drove the decisions or the strategy, but you do keep all those things in mind. I'd say it's less from okay, this is where we ended up going into the draft, but like holistically in the offseason, as you enter February, you think, okay, here's what we think we're going to do in free agency. Here are the strengths and the weaknesses of the draft class. How does that match up with the short and long term, of the roster? Like, okay, no secret. This was going to be a really strong running back class, right? Like everybody heard that going into the draft. We thought it made sense for us to take a young back, whether it was at 36 where we did or later on, and where you are in that room does factor into it. It won't drive the decision, but it is a part of the calculus.
And then just one for you, Kevin. If you're in a situation where you're playing your rookie quarterback, just the fact that he's left-handed, how much goes into that, if anything?
Yeah, not a ton, Nate. There's, the ball spirals a little bit differently, but, there's been plenty of examples of guys that have done it at a high level.
Okay, Andrew, it seems everybody in the country is surprised what's happening to Shedeur, except everybody in the NFL. So is what's happening to him being undrafted at this point coincide with your ranking of him?
You know what? I think it's unfair for me to comment in I guess maybe on behalf of the industry. All I can say is this, the time that we spent with Shedeur, and what he's done throughout his college career is impressive. He's an impressive young man. He's a really good quarterback. Sometimes fit comes into play, and I'd also say this. There are 4 more rounds of the draft, and then maybe lastly, it's less about where you get picked and what you do after you get picked. That's really the most important thing. And getting to know him over the course of the spring, he has a ton of resolve, and I think he's going to find himself in a really good spot.
Kevin, this is probably more for you, but with Quinshawn, Glenn sort of mentioned, one part of his game where he maybe needs to improve a little bit is catching passes, third down, sort of being used in that way. As you kind of think through what this backfield looks like with him, obviously you have Jerome Ford on the roster already. How do you sort of see his role? Is it more of like a first down, second down thing? Like how are you kind of picturing that coming together?
Yeah, I think, again, I would point out to these guys are young, and it's our job to develop them, and they're not finished products. he has a very legit skill set right now, and a skill set that we can use. And when he has the ball in his hands, whether we hand it to him or throw it to him, we want to use him in a bunch of different ways. But that's something that we'll always, with all of our players, identify things that we're going to help them get better at, and that's what Deuce is here for. That's what I'm here for, to help our guys reach that potential, because we're drafting young men here that are just not finished products.
Could I make one other point on that?
Yes, you can.
If you guys remember, when we took Nick in 2018, his rookie year, he had a strong rookie year, but the thought going into it was like, okay, well, he can't play on third down because he doesn't catch it well enough. Like, okay, like what's he going to be like as a protector? And he spent that whole offseason, that was his focus. He's like, look, I'm just going to catch a ton of passes, touch a ton of balls off the jug machine. I'm going to be great on pass pro, and he became a good third down player for us. So to Kevin's point about development and these being young guys, like none of these players are coming in as finished products, but part of our job is to help them improve and grow, both on the field and off of it.
Well, Scott, and then we'll close with Kelsey.
Andrew, following up on what Nate asked you, does the pick of Carson say anything about JOK's recovery from the injury? Like, does that signal that he's not going to be good to go?
No, Scott, it doesn't. And it's the right question. I totally understand. Like, that did not drive the decision for Carson. I want to be clear there.
If JOK were completely healthy, would Carson still be in play?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Joe, right here. I almost missed it. My bad.
Just following up on Carson, Andrew, he had one great year as a linebacker. Is there a concern about just the short sample size, and also just his versatility on special teams? How much is that a benefit, at least in the short term?
Yeah, no. So it is something we talked about. Like, yeah, you'd love to have a robust sample. I think honestly that's probably part of the reason it was discounted, because his year is outstanding, and physically, mentally, subjectively, objectively, pretty hard to find holes in his game. In terms of the kicking game part of it, his speed, his instincts, his tackling ability, it'll play well, as he contributes in that phase. And obviously he has some experience doing it from college. So, we think that there's a nice short-term and long-term role for him.
For either of you, one of the things that Harold talked about at Senior Bowl was wanting to show coaches and GMs that he can block as well. And so what have you seen on film from him that he can be a blocker in that role at tight end, and that he can grow in that area as well?
Honestly, I think people just look at his weight and assume he can't block, and because he's such a good pass catcher, but I just think that's totally incorrect. Like, he shows plenty of that on film. Certainly how we use him as a blocker may be different than how we would use David, just because of their body types. But I just, honestly, I think that's a bit of a lazy narrative.
Yeah, I think, Kelsey, it's really, when you're talking about tight ends, there's so many different jobs that go into it. And some of them are the traditional inline, hand in the dirt, got to cut off a 280-pound 6 technique who became a 7 technique, and that's really hard. Then there's also jobs you have to be from the backfield, coming across the line of scrimmage to block the defensive end, or inserting as a wrap blocker on a gap scheme. So there's so many different jobs that come from that room. And to AB's point, it's our job to put him in position to succeed, and not, ask him to do things that are not within the scope of what his skill set is.